Do not dismiss what unfolds today as if it were another ordinary movement across the sky, because this moment carries a weight that reaches far beyond a routine astrological update. There are rare days when the heavens seem to pause long enough for hidden truths to catch up with us. And today is one of those days. On July 7th, Neptune, the celestial force connected with every illusion you have accepted, every idealized vision you have protected, and every comforting story you have repeated to yourself, comes to a standstill before beginning its retrograde motion at 4 degrees and 25 minutes of Aries. That pause is not symbolic alone. It marks the instant when the veil that has quietly surrounded your perception begins to disappear. This is not the kind of awakening that arrives gently or politely. It tears away the comforting haze that has made difficult realities easier to ignore. For 3 zodiac signs in particular, this shift arrives with extraordinary intensity. They are not simply receiving a subtle hint from the universe or a passing feeling that something needs attention. Instead, they are approaching a profound spiritual confrontation that leaves no room for denial. Circumstances they have avoided for months will suddenly become impossible to overlook, forcing them to face truths they have delayed acknowledging. Yet the most important detail is something almost everyone misses. None of this truly begins today. What you are witnessing now is the visible result of a process that quietly started months ago. The seeds of this transformation were planted back in March, long before the current tension became obvious. If you have carried an unexplainable sense that life has been building towards something significant, if an invisible pressure has lingered beneath your everyday routines, if an inner restlessness has followed you without revealing its source, then what you have been feeling is not your imagination. There is a precise reason that emotional and spiritual pressure has continued to increase, and understanding that reason changes the way this entire retrograde should be viewed. Before that deeper explanation unfolds, however, you must first recognize why this particular Neptune retrograde stands apart from every similar event experienced during more than 150 years of astrological history. This is not another cycle repeating itself in familiar ways. It represents the return of an energy that almost no one alive has ever experienced firsthand, and overlooking its significance could mean missing one of the most revealing turning points of this era. Many people hear the word retrograde and immediately think about Mercury. Their minds jump toward delayed messages, misunderstood conversations, travel complications, or misplaced plans. That expectation becomes almost automatic because Mercury retrograde has become part of popular culture. Neptune, however, operates on an entirely different level. It is not concerned with rearranging appointments or delaying transportation. Neptune reaches into something much deeper than daily logistics. It reshapes the way reality itself is interpreted. This planet governs dreams, intuition, spirituality, invisible dimensions, and the vast collective unconscious that quietly influences humanity. Yet alongside those inspiring qualities exists another domain that carries enormous psychological power. Neptune also rules illusion, self-deception, fantasy, denial, and the narratives people create to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. During the past 14 years, Neptune traveled through Pisces, the sign traditionally associated with its greatest expression. Within Pisces, everything became fluid, emotional, limitless, and difficult to define. Boundaries dissolved so completely that facts and fantasies often blended together until distinguishing one from the other became increasingly difficult. Many individuals unknowingly accepted emotional stories instead of objective reality because the atmosphere itself encouraged blurred perception. Now that chapter has ended. Neptune has crossed into Aries, and that single change transforms the entire landscape. The importance of this transition cannot be overstated because Neptune has not occupied Aries since the 1860s. That astonishing historical distance is entirely accurate. The last period when this energetic pattern existed, humanity experienced an age marked by civil wars, fierce struggles surrounding individual sovereignty, and sweeping ideological conflict. Those years were not characterized by quiet evolution. They demanded dramatic transformation through confrontation, forcing societies and individuals alike to redefine identity, conviction, and personal freedom. That same energetic signature has now returned, carrying echoes of unfinished themes into the present. Neptune entering Aries does not soften reality. It does not encourage passive surrender. Instead, the limitless spiritual current represented by Neptune is funneled directly through the fiery determination of Aries, the sign identified with courage, individuality, survival, and the relentless drive to exist according to one's own truth. This creates an extraordinary psychological contradiction. Neptune naturally dissolves the boundaries of the ego, inviting surrender and transcendence. Aries instinctively strengthens personal identity, insisting upon independence and self-assertion. When those opposing forces occupy the same space, an exceptionally volatile astrological pattern emerges. It becomes a battlefield between dissolution and definition, between surrender and determination, between spiritual expansion and personal identity. Once Neptune reaches its stationary point, before reversing direction, that internal conflict intensifies dramatically. Energy that previously flowed outward begins turning inward with increasing pressure. Illusions are no longer protected by movement or distraction. Hidden beliefs begin fracturing under their own weight until the structures supporting them collapse completely. What once appeared convincing suddenly loses its power, leaving only the undeniable truth standing behind it. The remarkable part is that this process may seem sudden, but in reality the decisive moment has already occurred. The chain reaction did not begin with Neptune stopping today. The first spark was ignited several days earlier, even if most people failed to recognize it at the time. On July the 4th, only 3 days before Neptune stationed retrograde, Mars formed its conjunction with Uranus at 3 degrees and 52 minutes of Gemini. This alignment carried extraordinary force. Mars represents decisive action, conflict, courage, separation, and the willingness to cut away what no longer serves a purpose. Uranus symbolizes shocking developments, rebellion against established patterns, sudden breakthroughs, and revelations that strike with the speed of lightning. Meeting together in Gemini, the sign connected with communication, information, learning, conversation, and the exchange of ideas, these two planetary forces generated an energetic explosion whose effects reached far beyond a single day. Consider your own recent experiences carefully. Did unexpected information suddenly arrive? Did a conversation unfold that permanently changed your understanding of someone or something? Did surprising news interrupt your assumptions without warning? Perhaps a realization appeared from nowhere, leaving you speechless as everything you believed only moments before seemed different. Those experiences were not meaningless coincidences, they were signals that the energetic detonator had already been activated. The connection becomes even more significant because Mars rules Aries, the very sign Neptune currently occupies. Every movement Mars makes echoes directly through the terrain where Neptune now stands. When Mars united with Uranus on July 4th, it did far more than introduce temporary disruption. It destabilized the very foundation supporting every illusion Neptune has been weaving since entering Aries, setting into motion the profound unveiling that now reaches its unavoidable turning point. The disruption was never the destination, it was only the opening signal. What arrives today is something far more profound. First came the shock that shattered your expectations. Now comes the moment when understanding finally catches up with what your soul has already begun to experience. The events unfolding around you are not disconnected incidents scattered across a random timeline. They belong to the same unfolding story, and every piece has been moving into place with extraordinary precision. Immediately following the powerful conjunction between Mars and Uranus, Mars formed supportive aspects with both Neptune and Pluto on July 4th and July 5th. That sequence matters more than most people realize because it reveals that the instability of the past several days was never meaningless chaos. It was carefully directed transformation. What appeared to be disorder was actually the deliberate removal of structures that could no longer support your future. Something had to be dismantled before something stronger could exist. But that rebuilding cannot begin until every illusion hiding beneath the surface is fully exposed. This is why today feels so different. The destruction was never the final chapter. It was the preparation for revelation. Every zodiac sign would encounter this, Neptune retrograde in some area of life, because no one remains untouched when a planet carrying this much spiritual influence changes direction. Yet not every sign stands at the same distance from its center of gravity. Three signs find themselves directly beneath the strongest current of this cosmic event: Aries, Cancer, Libra. The reason is not symbolic. It is rooted in the exact geometry of the sky. Neptune stations retrograde at 4 degrees of Aries, and astrology recognizes three aspects that create the greatest pressure for growth: the conjunction, the square, and the opposition. These alignments refuse to allow life to continue on autopilot. They demand decisions, expose weaknesses, create turning points, and push circumstances toward unavoidable transformation. Aries receives the conjunction, Cancer experiences the square, Libra encounters the opposition. These are not gentle invitations to reflect whenever it feels convenient. They are moments when reality applies pressure until avoidance is no longer possible. As Neptune comes to a standstill upon these critical points, the illusions each of these signs has unknowingly carried begin to collapse under their own weight. What survives afterward is not the comforting version of reality that protected the ego. What remains is truth in its purest form, stripped of decoration, stripped of denial, and impossible to ignore. Let us begin with Aries, because this is where the mirror becomes impossible to escape. If your sun, moon, or rising sign falls in Aries, Neptune is turning retrograde directly within your first house, the realm connected with identity, self-image, personal direction, and the way you introduce yourself to the world. Over the past several months, something inside you has felt awakened. Perhaps an exciting new purpose appeared almost overnight. Maybe you believed you had discovered the path you were always meant to follow. It may have felt inspired, urgent, deeply meaningful, and impossible to question. That conviction likely became so powerful that hesitation disappeared and you moved forward with complete confidence. Yet today introduces a dramatically different perspective. The mist that has surrounded your perception begins to disappear, and what emerges may challenge everything you believed about your recent choices. Neptune's greatest illusion within Aries is remarkably persuasive because it convinces a person that every personal impulse automatically carries spiritual authority. It quietly blurs the line between authentic intuition and emotional excitement, between genuine inner guidance and the temporary rush created by urgency. Somewhere along the way, enthusiasm may have been mistaken for wisdom. Restlessness may have been interpreted as destiny. Immediate desire may have felt identical to divine direction. Some of the conflicts you entered, some of the missions you embraced, and some of the causes you defended with absolute certainty may never have belonged to you in the first place. They appeared meaningful because they wore the appearance of spiritual purpose, yet beneath that appearance they functioned only as distractions that kept your attention away from deeper truths waiting inside yourself. As Neptune begins moving backward today, the reflection you receive no longer adjusts itself to match your expectations. The mirror becomes honest. Instead of showing the version of yourself you hoped existed, it reveals the person standing beneath every performance, every defense, and every carefully maintained identity. That experience can feel deeply unsettling because many people unknowingly create identities designed to earn approval, avoid vulnerability, or protect old emotional wounds from being seen. Layers that once felt necessary begin dissolving one by one until only authenticity remains. Thanks to the explosive Mars and Uranus conjunction on July 4th, this realization is unlikely to unfold gradually. It may arrive in a single unforgettable moment. You could suddenly lose all passion for something that consumed your attention only days earlier. Your energy could disappear without explanation. A confrontation could expose assumptions you never imagined questioning, or a single realization could completely alter the way you understand yourself. None of these experiences represent punishment. They represent liberation through honesty. The universe is placing one question directly before you, and avoiding it is no longer possible. Are the choices you have been making truly emerging from your deepest self, or have they been driven by the parts of you still trying to outrun unresolved emotions? This question grows even more significant because Saturn also occupies Aries and is preparing to station retrograde on July 26th. That influence removes every convenient escape route. If Neptune dissolves illusion, Saturn demands responsibility for participating in those illusions. Together they insist upon mature self-examination without excuses, without blame, and without hiding behind comforting stories. Every belief you have accepted without questioning, now asks to be examined. Every identity built upon avoidance begins losing its foundation. The path of the spiritual warrior has never been about appearing fearless. It has always been about remaining willing to face reality, even when reality hurts more than expected, especially when it hurts. That willingness becomes the beginning of genuine strength rather than imagined strength. As this process unfolds for Aries, another sign reaches the point where months of invisible pressure finally reveal their purpose. Earlier, it was mentioned that the emotional tension surrounding this retrograde did not begin today. For Cancer, that statement carries exceptional importance because the timeline now circles back to its true beginning. Neptune entered its pre-retrograde shadow on March 15th, quietly initiating the themes now reaching their climax. For nearly 4 months, an almost unnoticeable pressure has been accumulating beneath the surface of your daily life. It has lingered in the background, difficult to define but impossible to completely ignore. Somewhere deep inside, you have sensed that something connected with your professional path no longer feels entirely authentic, even if you could not yet explain exactly why. That growing awareness has not been your imagination. It has been preparing you for the truth that is finally ready to emerge. You have sensed it for weeks, perhaps even months, though you may not have trusted that feeling enough to give it a name. There has been invisible distance growing between the future you have been working toward and the fulfillment you expected it to bring. No matter how much effort you invested, no matter how determined you remained, something inside continued whispering that the destination no longer matched the promise that first inspired you. That quiet discomfort reaches its turning point now. For Cancer, Neptune stations retrograde in the 10th house, the domain connected with career, public standing, authority, long-term ambition, and the image you project into the world. The square formed between Neptune and your sign is not an influence that can simply be acknowledged and ignored. Squares demand movement because they expose internal conflicts that have become impossible to sustain. They create tension between opposing parts of life until one of them must change. For months, your attention has likely been fixed upon a particular professional goal, a position you believed would validate your efforts, or an outward definition of success that seemed capable of delivering lasting satisfaction. Perhaps you convinced yourself that reaching a certain title would finally make everything feel complete. Perhaps the recognition of others slowly became more important than your own emotional response to the path you were walking. Or perhaps the deeper truth has been hiding somewhere you rarely allowed yourself to examine. Your professional ambitions may have become a refuge, a place where constant achievement protected you from facing emotional pain that continued waiting beneath the surface of your private life. Work became more than responsibility, it became distraction. Accomplishment became another way of postponing conversations your heart had been asking to have for a very long time. Today, that protective layer begins disappearing. The shine surrounding your ambitions grows noticeably dimmer, allowing reality to emerge without the comforting glow that once made everything appear more meaningful than it truly was. That revelation can feel unsettling because reality often looks very different once fantasy no longer softens its edges. Some of you will recognize that the career demanding so much of your energy has left your spirit feeling unexpectedly empty. You may realize that endless effort has been producing external progress while your inner world quietly continued asking for something entirely different. Others may discover that someone occupying an important place within their professional environment, whether a supervisor, mentor, employer, business associate, or trusted authority figure, has not been as transparent or trustworthy as previously believed. Dynamics that once felt confusing suddenly become unmistakably clear. Hidden motivations surface. Manipulation becomes easier to recognize. Deception that your intuition quietly detected but your conscious mind chose to overlook can no longer remain concealed. The difficult truth is not that these signs were absent before. The difficult truth is that accepting the illusion felt emotionally safer than confronting what your instincts already knew. This experience becomes even more emotionally significant because Mercury is retrograde in Cancer during this same period. Your attention naturally turns inward instead of outward. Rather than encouraging detached analysis, Mercury, in your own sign, asks you to revisit memories, emotional patterns, and unresolved feelings that have quietly shaped your decisions. Logic alone cannot guide you through this process. Every realization travels directly through your emotional body before it reaches your conscious understanding. You do not simply think about what is changing. You experience it deeply. It settles into your nervous system. It echoes through your chest. It creates sensations that cannot be explained away with rational arguments, because your emotions have become the primary language through which truth is speaking. That is why this period feels so personal. It is not merely changing your career, it is changing your relationship with yourself. The new moon in Cancer on July 14th represents the moment when renewal finally becomes possible. Yet genuine beginnings never arrive before necessary endings. Seeds capable of producing healthy growth cannot be planted while old foundations continue decaying beneath the surface. Anything built upon illusion must first be released before something authentic can take its place. If your professional identity has depended upon appearances rather than emotional alignment, this retrograde invites you to rebuild from a completely different foundation. Real authority is never created by a title, public admiration, or external recognition. Those things may come and go. Lasting authority grows from emotional honesty, from living in alignment with what genuinely nourishes your spirit instead of what merely impresses the outside world. That is the lesson Neptune now places before Cancer, and it is a lesson that ultimately offers liberation rather than loss. As Cancer begins confronting the truth behind ambition, another sign enters an equally powerful awakening through the landscape of relationships. Libra now arrives at the place where illusion and reality finally meet face to face. This revelation may be emotionally painful, yet it also carries the possibility of extraordinary freedom because truth always creates space for authentic connection. Neptune stations retrograde in your seventh house, the realm governing committed partnerships, marriage, contracts, long-term alliances, and the people with whom your life becomes deeply intertwined. Positioned directly opposite Libra, Neptune forms the opposition, one of astrology's most revealing aspects. Oppositions function like mirrors. They bring another person into your life so clearly that, through them, you begin recognizing the parts of yourself that have remained hidden, denied, or projected outward. For some time now, however, the mirror reflecting your relationships has not been showing an accurate image. Instead, it has reflected hopes, expectations, and idealized possibilities rather than objective reality. Over recent months, you may have invested enormous emotional energy into someone whose potential became more compelling than their actual behavior. Perhaps you imagined qualities within them that existed more vividly in your heart than in their actions. Perhaps you remained attached to who they might someday become instead of honestly accepting who they consistently showed themselves to be. You may have continued nurturing the vision of a future relationship while overlooking the reality unfolding in the present. Another possibility reaches even deeper. In your effort to preserve peace, maintain harmony, and avoid the discomfort of conflict, you may have gradually surrendered pieces of your own truth. Boundaries that deserved protection became flexible. Personal needs remained unspoken. Authentic feelings were quietly set aside because loneliness appeared more frightening than compromise. Neptune possesses a remarkable ability to color perception with idealism, encouraging people to see what they long for instead of what actually exists. During the past several months, that influence has shaped the way many Libras viewed their closest relationships. Today, that enchantment begins dissolving. The comforting filter through which you have been seeing another person is removed, revealing a reality that may feel startling precisely because it has been present all along. The awakening arrives as an unmistakable encounter with truth. The fantasy surrounding the relationship no longer holds together. The image you carefully preserved gives way to the person standing before you, exactly as they are. For some of you, the difference between those two versions will be impossible to ignore. This retrograde exposes every place where companionship became more important than authenticity. It illuminates every moment when your own values were quietly sacrificed in order to preserve connection. It reveals each occasion when personal boundaries were crossed repeatedly, because enduring disrespect somehow seemed easier than facing solitude. Those realizations may be uncomfortable, but they also represent the beginning of relationships built upon honesty instead of illusion, and that truth prepares the way for what unfolds next. The most difficult realization may not be discovering that another person failed to live up to your expectations. It may be recognizing that somewhere along the way you became the one protecting an illusion that your own heart already knew could not survive. You kept translating unhealthy patterns into proof of love. You convinced yourself that emotional exhaustion meant commitment. You interpreted constant sacrifice as devotion. You accepted situations that quietly diminished your spirit, because acknowledging the truth seemed more frightening than preserving hope. That is where this retrograde reaches its deepest level. It is not simply exposing what someone else has done. It is revealing the stories you continued telling yourself long after the evidence pointed in another direction. The next major turning point arrives with the first quarter moon in Libra on July 21st. This lunar phase does not simply encourage reflection. It demands movement. By the time this moon reaches its decisive point, observing from a distance will no longer be enough. The truth that Neptune reveals will require a response. Waiting, hoping, or pretending uncertainty will no longer feel possible because the circumstances themselves begin asking for action. This is the moment when awareness transforms into responsibility. At the same time, Saturn continues moving through your relationship sector, insisting upon maturity, accountability, clear structure, and standards that cannot be negotiated away for the sake of temporary comfort. Together, these influences ask something extraordinary of you. They ask for courage. Not ordinary courage, but the bold, unwavering courage associated with Aries, the willingness to choose authenticity over familiarity even when the choice feels emotionally painful. Some connections have survived only because they rested upon imagined possibilities instead of solid foundations. Those relationships now ask whether they can withstand reality without the support of fantasy. You're being invited to release attachment to someone's potential and begin responding to the person they consistently choose to be. Genuine love has never required the disappearance of your identity. Authentic partnership does not ask you to become smaller, quieter, or less truthful in order to remain accepted. Instead, it welcomes your complete presence, your honesty, your individuality, and your willingness to stand fully within your own truth. As Neptune continues dissolving illusion, the image of the flawless partner gradually disappears. In its place emerges something far more enduring than perfection. It is the understanding that lasting love can only exist where honesty exists first. Relationships built upon reality possess a strength that fantasies can never sustain, and that realization becomes one of the greatest gifts this retrograde has to offer. Yet the significance of this period extends far beyond the experiences of Aries, Cancer, and Libra alone. Hidden within the current planetary landscape is a pattern that elevates this entire month into something remarkably uncommon. Consider the extraordinary alignment unfolding across the Zodiac. Neptune stations retrograde at 4 degrees and 25 minutes of Aries. Pluto occupies approximately 4 degrees of Aquarius. Uranus stands at 4 degrees and 23 minutes of Gemini. Jupiter reaches 4 degrees and 22 minutes of Leo. 4 of the slowest and most influential planets within our solar system are gathered around the same symbolic point, the 4th degree of their respective signs. This is an exceptionally rare configuration, creating a network of harmonious planetary geometry that stretches across multiple signs simultaneously. The sequence continues unfolding throughout the month with remarkable precision. Uranus forms a sextile to Neptune on July 15th. Jupiter creates a trine with Neptune on July 20th. Neptune then forms a sextile with Pluto on July 25th. These alignments are not isolated events appearing without connection. Together, they function like the supporting framework surrounding an enormous structure under construction. They create stability during a period of profound internal change, ensuring that what falls away is accompanied by the possibility of rebuilding something far stronger. This changes the meaning of Neptune's retrograde entirely. The painful revelations emerging now are not acts of punishment, they are acts of preparation. The universe is not removing illusion simply to leave emptiness behind. It is clearing away unstable ground so that something genuine, forward-moving, deeply authentic, and capable of lasting growth can finally take root. Every collapse serves a purpose. Every uncomfortable realization points toward a destination. That destination is a life aligned with reality instead of wishful thinking. A life whose foundation can support your future because it has been built upon truth rather than imagination. This understanding also explains why the coming months deserve your complete attention. Neptune remains retrograde for 158 days, continuing this process until December 12th. For approximately 5 months, you will repeatedly encounter the same essential question. Is the life you are creating supported by truth, or is it resting upon unstable ground that cannot endure? This is not a period to drift unconsciously through familiar habits. Presence becomes one of your greatest spiritual tools, because Neptune carries the symbolism of water while Aries expresses the intensity of fire. Their combined influence can create a psychological atmosphere that feels strangely detached, almost as though your awareness is floating beyond immediate reality. During moments like these, your physical body becomes an essential source of balance. Movement reconnects you with the present. Conscious breathing calms the nervous system. Time spent outdoors restores perspective. Contact with the earth reminds you that stability is not merely emotional or spiritual. It is physical as well. Your body becomes the anchor capable of holding you steady, while your inner world reorganizes itself. Equally important is the willingness to accept responsibility for your own participation in every illusion now dissolving. Whether these revelations involve your identity, your professional direction, or your closest relationships, this retrograde asks you to resist the temptation to search for someone else to blame. The most transformative choice available during this transit is to honestly acknowledge the role you played in maintaining the fantasy. That realization is not meant to create guilt. It creates freedom because what you consciously recognize, you also gain the power to change. Clear boundaries become another essential lesson, especially for Cancer and Libra. Neptune naturally encourages merging, self-sacrifice, and the gradual loss of personal definition within the emotions or expectations of others. That pattern reaches its conclusion now. Aries offers an entirely different expression of strength. It teaches the importance of honoring your own truth, speaking your own needs, and accepting the temporary discomfort that sometimes accompanies healthy limits. The courage to say no becomes just as sacred as the willingness to say yes. Defending your authenticity is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of spiritual integrity. Ultimately, this retrograde carries one message above all others. The universe does not dismantle illusion because it wishes to harm you. It removes illusion because freedom cannot exist where deception remains. At first, releasing cherished fantasies may feel like loss. Yet once grief begins to settle, something remarkable becomes visible. What remains after illusion disappears is not emptiness. It is reality in its most honest form, imperfect, unpolished, deeply human, and infinitely more powerful than the dream that came before it. Today, Neptune stands still, and everything you have struggled to avoid acknowledging quietly steps into full view. The choice now belongs to you alone. You can turn away once more, or you can allow yourself to meet the truth with open eyes. The mist is lifting. Beyond it waits the life that has been quietly calling to you all along, not the imagined version, but the real one, the one capable of supporting who you are becoming. Thank you for spending this time here and sharing this journey. If this message resonated with you and you would like to continue exploring these profound astrological shifts together, consider subscribing so you will not miss future insights. Your support truly means a great deal. I would also love to hear what this retrograde is revealing in your own life, so feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself, stay grounded, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.